No problem.
Okay. Enjoy your meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's not so clear to me when we need to start, if we need to wait for a few people or not. Let's wait 1 minute.
Yeah, I would wait 1 or 2 minutes because I think they need to find the link and then move across to this meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
And-
I'm going to share the screen.
And Antonio, you can, when you are ready, you can just share your screen, your presentation, and everything should go smoothly to the end.
You should be able to see it now.
Yeah, perfectly.
Yes.
Hi, Freddy.
Hi, Masi. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. And you?
Good here.
Great.
But just from my understanding, most of the people that is here is from MedGol, no? And we are waiting for new people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Masi, do you have the links
Yes.
to the 2 paths? Because I think there are people asking in the common general chat.
Oh, yeah.
If we can paste, I don't have the links, but if you could do that, that would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello, Victor. Hi.
Hello, how are you guys?
Fine, thanks. You? What about you?
Not too bad for being Monday. Just kidding. Very, very, very good. Thank you, sir.
I don't really know when I should start because I think we are missing still people, no? A lot of people.
Well, actually, we have 2 parallel sessions, so we are supposing to recording the meetings just to give to all of them the possibility of following both meetings.
Okay.
One online and other in a secondary moment. So I think that we can start in just 1 or 2 minutes. We can start anyway.
Okay.
Feel free to start as you want.
Okay, no problem. So 1 minute and I will start.
Okay, great.
Okay, let's start. So thank you everybody that is attending. And if you are looking to this recording later on, welcome again. My name is Antonio Tabasco and I'm the head of the division for remote sensing services and geospatial solutions at GMB. And GMB is a partner of MedGold. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this meeting. And our idea here is to present the basic tools that we use within GMB, and also we have seen that they are quite standard in the industry for the development of commercial services and the characterization of the services and the feasibility of them to go to market. For the sake of the usability of the presentation, we have already set it in the channel, so you can access to it and use it as long as you want. And the idea for today is that we will talk about whenever we are going to define a commercial service, we need to define a plan for it. Which are the best approaches for the definition of the business model? Also to clearly understand the difference between the business model and the business plan. The definition of a prototype with enough maturity stage to be sold to the customers, and then any question that might arise, we will try to solve it. So basically, the idea for today is that we have seen both sides of the history whenever we are developing a business plan or commercial products, let's say commercial products. On one side, people that is not really thinking about what they want to sell. They have just the idea, but they are not really considering the steps needed to achieve a solution. And on the other side, people that is working a lot on the detail and definition of the different steps involved in the generation of a product. And sometimes this is not really required. Moreover, at the early stage, I'm not saying that it's not needed. What I'm saying is that we need to focus on what is really important at each stage. In particular, when we are talking of commercial services, something that is very important is to discriminate between what we consider the best thing, which is the value product or service that we are offering, and what is really important, which is the perceived value for the customer. We can sell the best solution in the market, but if the client doesn't really perceive the value of the solution, we are selling nothing. And for this, it's very important that we are able to find the proper balance between the service and product that we want to sell and the way we offer it to the customer so that they are able to realize the value of the service. Whenever we have been working in the definition of a business plan, this is the normal workflow to launch to market. You have the idea, you define the business plan, you start building the product service, and you develop some betas, and then you launch it to the market. We want to propose a different approach. Basically, the milestone will be the same, but in some points, we would like to change a little bit the order and also change the importance of the milestones. And the reason for this is that through the last decades, we have seen that the concept of the business model is starting to grow in opposition to the business plan. We will talk about it later on, but the point is that whenever we have an idea that we want to sell, and we assume that we are starting from that point, we need to work on the definition of the on the proper definition of the product that we want to sell, the building on the history about the service, around the service, identifying the gaps that the product or the service is filling, and also strengthen the partnership in case it is needed. Once we are able to do this, we can start showing the product, because at least we have a basic definition of the product, the cost, the gaps, the infrastructure needed, and with this we can iterate over the prototype and start selling the prototype to a reduced number of customers in order to improve the idea as much as possible before going for a larger inversion from third parties or co-founders. If we do this, then most probably we will follow the proper step to develop a successful commercial service. So basically, the business model in opposition to the business plan. Ideally, both are related to the same concept, the development of a product or service that we need to sell to, or we want to sell to the customers, but they are quite different in the sense that the business model is a high-level definition of the idea that we have in mind, while the business plan is more oriented to investors and a solid definition of the cost and economic infrastructure regarding the development of the service and product. And normally this is quite difficult to achieve in a good manner. Why? Because sometimes it's very difficult to know all the costs. Sometimes the Excel sheet is able to admit whatever cost or selling idea that we want to provide. But the reality is that it is better to start from scratch with a simple diagram of the idea, very high level definition, because at that point you will start realizing some gaps that you have, some needs for improvement of the service that will save time before really entering into the definition of a business plan. If later on is needed, the business plan, you can do it. But for sure, the business model can help you a lot to have a early and high-level definition of the business service. There are different approaches for defining this. One is the Canvas model, and another one is the Lean model. But essentially, we will see both of them, but they are essentially the same. The idea is to characterize the service in a simple diagram, as you can see here, with very simple sentences describing which are the key partners, which are the activities that are needed to achieve the idea, which are the key resources that we plan to use, which are the value proposition, I mean, how we plan to sell the idea to others, and this is the value proposition, which are the main strengths of the services that we have. Define the customer relationship. So we have two kinds of relationships, the customer relationship and the infrastructure and cost relationship. In that sense, we need to define all the channels, how we plan to communicate through each of the channels, how we plan to disseminate the information, which are our cost lines, and which of these lines require an investment. It is also quite important to define the customer segment. We can sell the idea for climate, we can sell it to farmers, we can sell it to cooperative, we can sell to insurance, to banks. I mean, there are many different potential segments, and we need to identify those that are really critical for the initial development of our service. Another part that is quite important is the cost structure. The cost structure is quite significant in the sense that if you are participating alone as a startup, it's simple and it's easier to understand it. If you are participating together with another company, then we start to complicate the idea, because one company is doing an investment, the other one is doing another kind of investment. They can do an investment in effort or in terms of infrastructure. So how we value this, how is this affecting to the final cost, which are the revenue streams that we expect in order to receive the funding from the customers. All of these need to be defined, and for this, the canvas model is quite helpful, together with the link canvas. Here we have the link canvas. What I like between both of them, to me, the link canvas is a bit more clear in the sense that you have less things to write, because you have the problem, the solution, the unique value proposition, the channels. Essentially, the information is the same, but the way it is organized is slightly different. And whenever we have an idea within our company, even if it is an earlier stage, we try to define the link canvas for the idea, looking for really identifying if the idea is solid enough to stand off for a discussion and later production. So we come back to the initial point, which is your value proposition. And again, this is what we want to remark as much as possible. To have an idea is quite good, and it's very important, and it's critical for the success. But in order to go for the next step, it's quite important that you start thinking about how to do it. You don't really need, we want to underline that you don't really need to go step by step and define all the steps in order to produce the final result. What is important is that you at least have an overall idea of the product and service that you want to sell, and the revenues and the cost and the way to sell it. With this, you will identify the problems in case they are there, of course. And we are going to provide here some examples. So for instance, Met goal at high level. Met goal, this is the idea behind. So we have the ICT, which is the one providing the service generated to the customers. And then we have some specialization by sectors: grape, wine, olive. We have climate information. We have an storage of the climate information. We have models that are using the climate information and also the in-situ data. We have climate indices, knowledge about the phenology, disease. All of them is put together and working together from different groups, from different locations, but put together in the ICT and provided to the customer. We need from the customer also to receive some information in order to improve the models that we are producing. So with this, we have the overall idea of MedCall, and now we have how to sell it. And this is an ongoing activity, how to sell it. We can sell it to private institutions, we can sell it to public institutions, we can ask for a subscription, we can ask for a nominal fee, it could be freemium, we can target to banks, insurance, commercial farmers. We need to identify all the sectors. So we move to the Canvas model and we try to write down the different issues. So for the key partners, we need people, experts in climate, in local data, in the provision of local data, expert in the sectorial areas where we are working, research institutions. At the same time, the complexity of the services requires an investment in infrastructure. So we need quite a complex infrastructure to work with the data and to produce the solution. And with this, we can generate the value proposition, the climate services that we want to sell, and you will see later on some examples. Which are the channels in order to provide this? The social media, the community, how we plan to disseminate information regarding the services that we are offering. Which are the customer segments? The agriculture, it can be public, private, as we saw before, and these need to be detailed. The cost structure and the revenue stream are still being detailed. But we will see now a more concrete example. So imagine a use case where the problem is this. We want to see if this spring will be particularly dry or wet. And with this, we can generate information in order to decide what to do. And if we need to acquire specific products for the crops that we have or not. And this is affecting, of course, the cost of the companies that are managing the farms. So for this, we can generate, with the method, we can generate different kinds of maps and disease and provide some statement regarding the accuracy of the prediction that we are doing. We can also look back in the past and see which has been the evolution of the spring in terms of pluviometry during the last decades. And with this, we can generate different information that can be provided to the customers. So if we try to characterize a possible service using this solution, we see that the problem is how I'm going to be affected by the pest, if the spring is going to be rainy or not, which is the solution to provide a climate service using seasonal forecast in the platform, the key metrics for us as the money that we can save to the client. If we can characterize that, it will be very important. The number of clients, of course, which is the unique value proposition, the platform where we sell it, the accuracy of the results that we generate, and the parameterization, how customizable is the solution that we are offering. How we plan to offer this? Through different channels, but basically, basics and interview with the customers. The revenue streams, the price per customer and the training workshops. So those will be the main revenue stream. But in terms of cost, we have the ICT and the marketing and the effort of the developers. And then we are proposing here another use case just for you to use it. If you want to test it, and you can send it later on to us, and we can provide comments if you want to work with the Canvas model. The idea here is, in this case, we have vineyards, and we would like to see if the region where the vineyards are, which will be the forecasted evolution of the temperatures in the next decades. Because this will be affecting the quality of the grapes and also the future by itself of the vineyards there. So all the information is provided here, and we provide a link Canvas model empty for you to fill it as you consider. And again, we can evaluate the results if you want and discuss it. We are about to conclude, but I would like to focus as well in the prototype, which is quite important. Whenever we talk about the prototype, and we come back to the image where we were following the evolution of a business plan, of the generation of a product, we saw one step, which was the development of a prototype. But it is quite important that we understand the difference between a prototype and what it is called the minimum viable product. The minimum viable product essentially means how much effort do we need to spend into the development of the prototype before offering to the customer for the evaluation of the quality of the results. So the idea is, it's simple to define, but difficult to do it. We are limited in budget, not like a large corporation that can develop whatever they want. And we know that if we fail in what we develop, we most probably we will lose the opportunity with the customer. So we need to look for the minimum solution that it will be interesting for the customer, but it won't compromise a lot of effort from our side. And another concept that is quite important is to start building and completing features for each minimum viable product. That means that if you try to grow adding features, then most probably the user will lose the opportunity to see the real quality or the real advantage of what you are offering. Instead of that, if you present standalone versions of the developments that you are doing that will be completed, although lacking functionalities, it will be much more effective for the users, because they will see, at least they will see something concrete, and you won't need to start saying that this is the idea, but it is not yet developed. So it is better to work on single or standalone concepts of your service than increasing the functionality, because normally during the development you will realize later on that you need to modify things and that things are not working the way you were expecting and you need to modify the design. So it's better to follow sort of a agile methodology in order to reduce the time and the effort. And that's all basically that I wanted to say. I think that now is Marta. Marta, I don't know if anybody has any question. If not, then Marta, you can proceed.
Thanks, Antonio. Are there any questions for Antonio before we go ahead?
Yes. Hi, Antonio. This is Victor here. Can you hear me, please?
Yeah. Hello, Victor.
Hi. Hello, Antonio. Thank you for sharing the explanation. It was wonderful. I just have one question. Would you recommend to start by the customer segments or value proposition? Where should I start? Obviously, the revenue streams comes after having developed some of these two concepts. But another question that might be relevant is whether it would be good to have one customer segment or try to target different customer segment. If so, everything one on the same canvas or different? Sorry if I have blown you with too many questions. It just came to my mind. So
no, it's okay. It's okay. It's a very interesting question. The point is that, and we always have this discussion, should we target too many different target segment or user segment or not? The benefit will be that if you fail with one of them, probably you will succeed with the other. The problem is that from our experience, it's very difficult to approach to different target segments with the same message, and you sometimes for instance in agriculture or this is also applicable to climate. If you talk with the insurance companies, the message is completely different, and you need to know about the domain in order to speak at the same level. But if you go to the local farmers, then the speech is completely different and the message is completely different. So my recommendation is that instead of going only to one, avoid going to many of them, and try to do a Kanban for each the user segment, so that you have different value proposition for each of them, because the approach is different in the end. I mean, imagine your service, and normally when we are talking about climate and any other kind of solution related to that, for me it's like a cube with different faces. Each phase is applicable to a different target segment. And for that, you need to define a specific solution and a specific message. I don't know if with this I can help you a bit more.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. It is crystal clear. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Antonio? If not, I can start my screen.
Okay, thank you, Marta.
Thank you, Antonio and Freddie. I don't know if you want to stick around or if you want to go. It's up to you. You're more than welcome to stay to hear my talk. But yeah, totally understand if you're both very busy. But yeah. Okay, so thanks again for your contribution, Antonio. That was really interesting. And I will share my screen and my video. Sorry. Obviously Monday here. This is not been a great day for me. But anyway, so my talk is more about the method. So this is a follow-up conversation presentation from my previous presentation on the co-production and how we think about the processes of co-producing climate services. And this is a bit more on how we think about methods for engaging with the users throughout the process of developing climate services, and also how to collect information. So this is kind of more of a practical session, although I do include some, some pointers of and slides that I've used last time. So this is just to remind us why this need to co-produce. Why do we think about involving very closely the end users and other stakeholders in the process of developing climate services? And a lot of it passes around this idea of actually capturing some of their knowledge and expertise, gather information about their needs, understand how the service can fit within their frameworks, organizational, institutional frameworks and decision-making processes. So therefore to improve the usability of those services, but also to let the users really influence and help establish the development of the service. So this is just a kind of a summary of what we've talked about last Thursday. And the other thing I would like to just highlight as well is that obviously climate services, the development of climate services is a process. It's not a static moment in time. It's something that evolves over time, and it normally takes quite a long time to pursue effective co-production processes. And there are different representations of this process. So I just included a couple there. The top one is the one we kind of adopted, which kind of represents what we've been doing in MedGold. And the one below, it's recognized by colleagues, which have done a lot of work in Africa. But it kind of encapsulates this, from initial stages of developing, understanding context and climate information down to the processes of adapting, translating, and testing the services, and then the final use by the users, which is the holy grail of what we try to achieve with this. Another point I want to, and this is another image I used last week as well, is this spectrum of engagement. So when we talk about engaging the end users, but also other stakeholders, so other people that might be important in the development of climate services, besides the different stages of the development, there's also different levels of engagement. So the different people might come at different points to engage in the development of the climate services, depending on their role and their degree of agency within the climate service. So at the top, the image is about this kind of spectrum, from very kind of passive, almost passive engagement. The stakeholders are just consulted upon, down to the very kind of hands-on immersive co-production levels of interaction and engagement, where often the end users are part of the development process. So for example, in MedGold, our end users, so our industrial partners, were partners within the project. So they're fully immersed in the development process. This image has also been also showed, interestingly enough, by Suraj and Chris Hewitt in the first plenary session. And again, this is just another way of highlighting the spectrum of engagement against some of the potential tools and activities that one can expect when we talk about climate service. So it can go from providing a specific climate service to users through a website or a web tool or a web application, for example, where there's a lot of, it's much more a one-way direction, down to the other end of the spectrum, where we have very intricate and close relationships between those involved in the process of co-development. So this is just, again, another way of illustrating the spectrum of engagement and the type of activities, and also the mechanisms through which that engagement happens. And this is a quite recent paper, actually, from, again, other colleagues of ours. Actually, they are based at BSc, so they are Adria's colleagues. And this is based on the work they've done in a FP7 project, the Primavera project, where they looked at almost like a wheel of empowerment in terms of the range at which different types of stakeholders and users, and they make this distinction between potential users, champion users, and stakeholders in terms of disaggregating this in terms of level of engagement and level of interaction with the process. And also the kind of, on the outside of the circle, you can see the different ways in which they can become engaged and involved in this process. So I suggest you read the paper. It's quite good, and it's quite comprehensive in some of these aspects. Quite useful to help us think through about these things. But stepping back a bit on the methods, we tend to talk about methods and ways of engaging mechanisms, and we tend to put them all in the same bag. But as a social scientist, I feel the need to maybe distinguish a bit things here. There are the specific social science research methods, which are methods identified in academia, where they are the kind of the more formal methods through which we collect information and analyze information towards research. And these include things like interviews, focus groups, questionnaires. There's also others, but these tend to be the more formal and recognized methods. And then there's the more informal ways, which are not necessarily recognized as official social science research methods, but they're often quite used as well within, within the context of climate service to help us engage and in this ongoing interaction with users. And obviously in the last year, for example, webinars have been, one of the key ways of sharing information, for example. Obviously, in the last year, we all turned to the online tools, right? So there's a lot of meetings using Zoom and Shime and MS Teams and all sorts of different things. But then there's also social media. There's been a huge investment in kind of passing on information or involving to different extents, wider users, communities within the climate services arena. So that it is important to distinguish, because being within academia, we're quite fussy about our methods, and we're quite prescriptive on how the way of pursuing those on the ground, whilst there is also a range of more informal ways of engaging and keeping that interaction going. And then there's also the kind of the qualitative versus quantitative data. Of course, I'm assuming this goes without saying, but quantitative goes in terms of quantifying numbers, how many people said this and that and that. Qualitative goes into more the detail, the nitty-gritty, the specificities of certain individuals, certain cases, and things like that. And then there's also, we can also adopt for mixed methods approach, for example, so we can decide to have questionnaires that quantify numbers and also interviews, and then use them to complement and help us understand what's going on the ground at a given point. But in terms of actually selecting methods within the context of climate service, so how do we go about selecting which methods we want to use in a particular context? There's a number of different things we normally should think about, obviously, and this goes without saying, right? This is almost kind of common sense, but obviously what we're trying to achieve with the service is critical, right? How we want to develop it, even the context within which it's being developed. So if it's in a research context, it might have a particular, it might have specific end users already attached to that research project. If it's an operational setting, it might deal with, for example, a wider community of end users. For example, if it's an operational service provided by a national med service, it might be a service provided through a website, for example, and it might try and reach a huge number of different potential users. So the aim of the service really helps to understand how to best engage with those people, and also the purpose, why they're being engaged, right? So the level of engagement also relates to the purpose of the service we're trying to achieve. And then, the type of information and knowledge required. So why are we engaging with them? Is it to inform them? Is it to collect feedback? Is it to improve the service? Is it to create a new service? So the type of information we require and who we're trying to engage also help us think through about in terms of methods. And then, of course, the range of resources, the expertise as well. Whoever is deploying, whoever is developing the service, do they have enough expertise to engage with them, or they are more comfortable with particular type of methods? So all of that helps us think through what's the best method or methods to deploy, and for what. And obviously, there's other aspects. Things like, for example, language barriers is often the case. If we trying to develop a climate service across a continent like Europe, we're obviously going to find different language barriers, and we need to think about that. Logistics as well. Are we engaging them face-to-face or online, and the challenges of doing that online? So there's a number of different things that help us think through what the best methods of engaging. And here I've actually took this from a handbook on social research methods. And this has been quite interesting for me as a process, because putting together these slides almost forced me to think through these things. This, for me, are basically tacit knowledge. I work with these methods every day. So I actually had to step back and verbalize what I was thinking in terms of, what do we mean by interviews and questionnaires and focus groups, because this for me is, it's my bread and butter. So, but it's good. As a reflective process, it's been quite interesting for me putting together these slides. So, I'm assuming a lot of you know what we mean by these things, but I just thought it would be good, just for the sake of clarification and just to ensure we're all on the same page. I focus on the three main methods that we tend to use as formal methods in climate services. And obviously, questionnaires tend to be more focusing on closed questions, so more targeted interaction, standardized questions and things like that. So questionnaires are very good, for example, if we have a huge number of people you want to engage with, and you want to have a very quick snapshot of, very high level aspects of it. Interviews, on the other hand, tend to be more time consuming, more resource intensive, requires a certain level of expertise to deliver them effectively. And they normally allow you to get the in-depth. So you are able to explore in very in-depth specific issues with specific people. And these can be individual interviews, or if they are in groups, they tend to be called focus groups. So these are normally the big difference between it. And they can be also semi-structured. So you can have, actually in terms of the interviews, you can have structured, semi-structured, and unstructured. The difference between these three modes are the structure is where you have very specific questions you want to ask, and you don't go outside of that script. Semi-structure is you have those questions, but you can allow the conversation to go into different areas that might be of interest to the interviewee or to yourself that you want to explore as an interviewer. And the unstructured is just letting the participant talk about what's important for them. So that's more or less the big difference. The focus groups similarly are very, can be discussions targeted to a specific group. That group normally have some common interests or some common background. So they're not chosen randomly. They are selected to be part of a discussion group, and it tends to focus on a particular topic. So it can be almost like a group interview kind of thing. So you can discuss different topics with the people at hand. So this is just the gist. And they all, the good of this is that in the face of the pandemic, they can all be applied online. Obviously, there are challenges of doing this online because it's much harder to create a rapport with people. But at the same time, given the pandemic, we can very quickly adapt to the new situation. So it's good that we are able to pursue these methods online. And I've showed some of this before, last Thursday as well. There are pros and cons again, and I've touched upon some of these already. But some of these advantages, disadvantages often helps as well to think through what is the best method or mixed methods that we want to use to achieve, to understand a certain situation, right? One point I want to do here is the ethical aspects that are attached to collecting data. For example, in Europe, we are under the influence of the General Data Protection Regulation, so GDPR, which establishes all the ethic considerations and information you need to put together when you're trying to collect information from participants. So there's very strict guidelines and a framework that you need to address when you want to collect information from people. And this is all to do with, having their informed consent, so them knowing what they're giving you information for, how that information is going to be used, if there are confidentiality issues that they want to have secured, things like that. So it's all about, making sure that the people involved in your process of data collection and analysis understand why they're being asked certain things and what are you going to do with that data ultimately. So they need to be informed of that, and they need to give their consent. Otherwise, you are in breach of legal action or potential legal action. So, and in terms of ethics consideration, there's also certain institutes, like, for example, universities, like University of Leeds, they all need to comply as well. We also need to comply, besides the GDPR, we also need to comply with our own ethical process internally. So we have an ethics committee that we need to fill in forms when we pursuing research and we're collecting data from participants. So there's ethical considerations can be considered in different contexts depending on the organization you're working on. But in Europe, for example, we're all under GDPR influence, so you need to be aware of that. Feel free to ask me questions as well whilst we're going ahead, but I can't see hands, so you just need to interrupt me. Are there any questions? Sorry, I don't even know who's online. I might be talking to myself. I can't see anything besides my slides. Anyway.
You are not talking to yourself, Marta.
Okay, thanks, Luigi. That's good to know.
I'm around, at least me. Hi.
Yes, thanks. So in terms of more methods, as I said, there's a range of different methods. I just included there some of the other types of methods that we tend to use associated to climate services, being it to understand, assess user needs, or to understand, for example, aspects related to gender, which for example, gender aspects are quite critical in research in least developed countries, for example. So where we're trying to understand what are the influences of gender and how they use information, for example, things like that. And there are also other participatory methods you can use to develop consensus or understand what are the priorities in terms of a particular group. So, for example, using narratives and scenarios is often done as well in terms of future planning and understanding what are the best options on the table in terms of adaptation measures, or even to create new adaptation mechanisms, for example. So workshops as well tend to be a bit bigger than focus groups and can be less focused on a specific topic, can be more varied, and can have also more participatory aspects to it. Vulnerability assessments, I think that goes without saying, is like, for example, understanding current or past or future vulnerability of specific communities to climate change, weather or climate change. World CAF is a specific type of running a participatory workshop, but where people go around different tables and discuss different topics. And what else? Interactive backcasting is, for example, doing it's basically discussing with the group of people what would they have done differently if they had that particular information at that given point, for example. So that tends to be used when there's kind of major impacts or the negative impacts of a particular event, and they can go and understand and discuss with that affected group how would they done things differently, what kind of decisions would they have been able to make if they had that particular information available to them. So all of these different, they're not all official methods, but they're ways of engaging and understanding what are the different aspects of it. These are just some examples. There are more. These are I just made a selection of the key ones that we tend to use, but there are many more. And there's also hybrid, different kind of bringing two different methods together and kind of. So there's quite a lot of flexibility. That's what I'm saying. I think what is important is to really understand what you're trying to understand at that particular situation and what are the conditions you have around you to deploy a particular method. And as I said, there's also other more informal mechanisms to share information, to attract people to be more involved in the process that you're leading in terms of climate services, such as webinars, user forums, mailing lists. All of this are also ways of engaging, but at a more high level, right? In terms of sharing information, informing people of the latest news and things like that. So they can be used also to complement this ongoing interaction. I should also say that these methods some methods are better for collecting data, other methods are more used to keep the interaction going. So there's also a slight difference, but they can all, as I said, they tend to be all put in the same bag. So it's up to you to also discern what are the best ways of interacting and methods to collect data. So there's they tend to complement each other. Are there any questions on the specific methods before we go on this?
Hi, Marta. Yes, it's me, Victor. Can I ask you something?
Of course.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. I'm just wondering, would you include in questionnaires the self-questionnaires as well, like any subjective, perception that the user might have, or would you recommend just rather the interviewer produces the questions? And another question would be about the qualitative methods, the analytical. Would you recommend any analytical projections methodology or any, or just more based on quantitative? That's my kind of question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Victor. I'm not sure I understood the first question. Can you repeat that? I think I lost you a bit. So.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I usually talk too low. Okay. I was just wondering if you would recommend to include the self-questionnaire in the particular, conception, or like any more Likert scales, or would you recommend self-questionnaires to be included within the questionnaires methodology? Thank you.
What do you mean by self-questionnaires?
Right. Okay. Well, I come from social science, but psychology, not the sociology. But we do include the perception where the user has
perception space. Okay. Yeah. No, I was just making sure. Yeah.
We call it self-questionnaires. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. No, that's why I was asking, because for us is and a lot of the questionnaires I do are based on people's perceptions. So they give us their own perception of what is the situation. So we do that. I mean, I don't call it self-questionnaire. I just call it a questionnaire. And then some of the questions, or a lot of the questions, are actually around their perceptions of need and how they use them, how they think they use them. So there, a lot of the work I do in terms of deploying surveys and questionnaires is based on what you call a self-questionnaire. Yeah, so definitely. Because ultimately, we're trying to understand a lot of the cases, particularly in climate service, we're trying to understand their specific context, right? So they are the ones that know about it, but we are aware that it's based on their own perceptions of their reality. So, but I think that's how we do it a lot of the times. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you. I was just thinking, if even that with all the massive amount of details, information we have about climate services with Met Goals and Copernicus, the end user might not actually find it of any use. So that might be actually based on his or her own perception. If we are able to capture this kind of information, we might end up, arguing some other way or find any path to try to resolve that perception with, objective details, or were there another techniques?
I mean, based on my experience of climate services and over the last few years, a lot of the work is on that, interface, that where is the negotiation, where is the compromise, right, between what the users want or they think they want and what the science can give, and there's a lot of that. But obviously normally, and again, it depends a lot on where you're coming from, which stage of the climate service you're at as well, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But in a lot of cases, the starting point for a lot of these projects is what do the users want or what they think they need, because there are different questions. But we normally ask, and it's normally based on a perceptions approach. And then with time, we start unpacking those perceptions and really try and understand if that's exactly what they need or they think they need. But it takes time. It's a process.
Okay, thank you.
I can't remember your second question, though. Do you want to ask it, or?
Me neither. No, sorry. It just yeah.
Okay.
I remember it just to have a more quantitative approach or qualitative approach. Which one would you recommend? Because interviews could be analytical, but questionnaire might be a little bit more based on a concept or variables could be a little bit more quantitative. So you said both of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't tell you. It depends on the context, and I'll talk a bit more about that now.
Okay.
Because each case is a case. So I think there are advantages for quantitative and qualitative. It's more what exactly you're trying to understand, but also what are the conditions you have to make it work as well on the ground, because there's a lot to be said about resources, time, budget, and all that, right? So it's not that straightforward. But anyway, so where do we start, right? So I'll continue my next few slides, and then you can, see if that makes sense. Because I want to go through these slides quickly because I have a few examples towards the end of how we've done things. So I think that might be more useful for you guys, right? Because this is all theory. But so where do we start? And I think there's a couple of things here that I want to highlight. One is sometimes, like I said, if we are at the beginning of the process, so if the climate service doesn't exist and we want to understand who are the potential users, what they might need or what they think they might need, perceptions, what the science already exists and what we can bring. So that's kind of the first stage, right? If the service doesn't exist, it's almost like a blank canvas. So we need to understand, why are we getting involved, what are we trying to achieve, who should be involved. Sometimes participants are already part of the project if it's a research context. If it's not, they might not be involved, so we need to find them. So it really depends where you're at in the process and, the aim, the participants, the time you have to develop these things, the budget. So all of these constrain how you think about methods, okay? Sometimes, and I provide an example next, sometimes we come in the process and we're asked to assess an existing service. So for example, in that case, the service already exists, but they don't know who are the users, which happens quite a lot. So they don't know what are the users or what is the benefit of the services to the users. That requires different kinds of methods because we already know the service, but we might not know who the users are. And, so it does depend where you are in the process, the context within which the service is being either developed or revised or evaluated, and also the conditions you have in place to perform the study, right? So I've just started to think about it because there's something I think in terms of the stage of the project, and project I mean by where we're at in the climate service co-production or co-development, and the stage of the project. If it's a project like Met Goal, for example, right, where we start from the very beginning, there is no climate services yet. There are already the users. We identify them. They are part of the project, but we don't know exactly how the service fits in their decision making, how it's going to be used, when, why, and all of that kind of provides a bit of the starting point, so understanding the context. And this obviously includes the project work, obviously, the budget, the expectations of the stakeholders, the resources, even the willingness to be involved, right? And also the stakeholders, are they internal to the project? Are they external? What do they know in terms of expertise? How they are expected to work in the service? Also existing knowledge. There's a lot of literature in terms of climate information needs, the science aspects, the kind of vulnerabilities in particular sectors and particular organizations. So obviously, taking stock of existing knowledge, be it grey literature or academic literature, is quite important. It normally requires some kind of assessment of what we already know, because a lot of this work is not done in a vacuum. So there's a lot of things that came before, and we should take stock on that. And also equally important is understand what we don't know as well. A lot of the times we think we assume certain things, and we think that we know what the users want, and sometimes they don't know what they want as well, like the perceptions aspects that Victor was just saying. And then it requires time to really grasp what exactly we're trying to achieve, and what else we need to understand before we move forward. So this is just a brave, I know, and this is kind of almost like a starting point where what kind of information is important to understand, assuming there's no climate service. So it's kind of like blank canvas, okay? And this is, I would advise you to look at, this report is quite good and kind of provides a bit of the information. It is important to start kind of unpacking a bit when you're dealing with the potential users for the first time. But there's then kind of the middle process, and this is kind of, it's not recognized in the literature yet. It's kind of like what I call intermediate stage, where you've started developing the beta versions, and you kind of going back and forth with the users or potential users, whoever is involved, right? The people to whom, to which you're developing the service for. So they're involved at different extents, the feedback loops, which can be set up in different ways as well, can be online, can be face-to-face, telephone, testing, using that information to readjust the service. There's a lot of back and forth. This mid stage is very messy. It tends to go quite back and forth, and there's a lot of the times that's when we sometimes apply this agile method, where we have very short periods of work, like what we call the sprints. So we have like 2-3 weeks of work, and then we meet again, and then 2-3 weeks of work, and then we meet again. So there's a lot of back and forth here between the different stakeholders. And then the final stages, which is when we get a service that is considered finalized, either because the project is finishing or because the users say, this is perfect, this is what we need. And where we really try and understand then, okay, service is there now, how are they using it, and what is the added value of it? Because ultimately, we need to understand if this is of benefit to them. Because if after this whole process, we realize the service is not of use or not being used, we really massively failed in the previous stages. But it is important to have this final understanding, because it's almost a validation of all the work you've done. If they use it, if the end users use the service, it means that we've been successful in our process. It doesn't mean that it can't continue being improved, and that's why in the axis I put this kind of ... because I think it never ends unless it's a project and then it ends when the funding finishes. But if it's, for example, an operational service, can be something that it keeps going. So that's it. I won't go here because I want to go into the examples. So this was a project we've done almost 10 years ago, and the key aspect of this project is that this was one of the big first climate services projects in Europe. So basically, we were trying to understand what were the seasonal to decadal user needs across Europe, across different sectors. I think we were looking at 7 or 8 sectors. So it was a massive endeavor, right? The first kind of need for collecting information is to understand what was the landscape, who was using what, how, when, and if they weren't using seasonal, for example, why they weren't using it. So it was the kind of the first step. And the work we've done, and for this, we use mixed methods. So we used a European-wide online survey, and we got almost 500 responses back. And then we did in-depth interviews across different sectors, different countries. And triangulating these two methods allow us to have a very, fairly good understanding of what was going on the ground at that time, because obviously this is a snapshot of that particular time. And that first analysis then allow us to identify 6 areas for developing pre-operational prototypes in Europe. So this first assessment allow us to then identify the critical areas, the critical sectors where pre-operational services in Europe focusing on seasonal would have the most impact. So this is just, and there's a paper on that if you want to read more about that, but this is just a representation of the countries where we've done just this, we got responses across the survey and the interviews as well. And below there's the same, but as a graphic kind of more quantitative aspect. So this was really important because there was no understanding whatsoever. So what I was telling you about the kind of existing knowledge, we didn't have this knowledge. So we had to kind of start from scratch. And that's why we kind of deployed a massive European survey and interviews across the board. The difficulty with this was that I was leading this work package and we were 16 partners in that work package and they all conducted interviews. And there was quite big challenges in terms of training people to do interviews. A lot of them didn't have social sciences background, so they didn't know how to do interviews, developed the interview protocol to be consistent. So there were kind of more logistic operational challenges to do that, but we did achieve a good result in the end. The other one, and I have an example for each of the stages I've just talked about, just to give you an understanding of how we do it. This is the MedWorld project, and this is just a quick snapshot of how we assessed these kind of feedback loops. So the adjusting, testing, adjusting, and there was more to it, but this is kind of the more testing aspects of it. And here I focus particularly on, let me just see if I did, yeah, I did. So in the testing phase, we, particularly regarding the dashboard, which is being presented in the other path at the moment, I think, but you guys all have access to it. We were mainly doing these sprint meetings. So again, this agile approach where every week or every 2 weeks, there were teams of the end users with teams of the technical teams coming together, showcasing the dashboard, discussing, and really have that kind of ongoing, not face-to-face, but online discussions about what's working, what's not working, what needs to improve. And this would cover not only the content in terms of the climate information being provided, but how it was visualized, colors, structure, all of it. So everything to do with the user interface, it was being discussed during these meetings. And then we kind of also assessed there were also the tools being developed, not only the dashboard. We also assessed that through surveys and workshops. So whilst the dashboard was being assessed and revised and tested using these sprint meetings, the other tools were being assessed through surveys and workshops. And there's reasons for that, but I can expand a bit more. The final, I think I have another one. Oh, I do have. I have quite 4 examples. Sorry. The final step for the MedWorld services, and this is where we are at the moment. This is work I'm doing at the moment, actually within work package 3, which is the wine sector. All the sectors are being assessed in terms of the added value to the users, but I use here the example of the SOGRAP. And what we're doing here, we're trying to understand really the added value of all the work we've been doing over the last 3 years for the SOGRAP people, okay? And this was done by setting up a workshop with them to explain why we wanted to assess the added value, how we wanted to do it, and to set up the assessment exercise. And then the assessment exercise itself was done through the last 6 weeks. We asked them to interact with the dashboard every week. And we had people reminding them to do that and for them to provide us online feedback on their interaction with the dashboard. And there was a set of questions, specific questions in that questionnaire. And then we are going to start the interviews with them. So we're going to interview each of the participants that interacted with the dashboard in this month, actually. So I'm interviewing them in Portuguese, language varies, in Portuguese, to really understand how they made use of the dashboard and how they see it, using it moving forward. So this is where we're at the moment. The final project is just to give you an idea of when a service already exists, but the provider do not know what's going on the ground, which this happens quite a lot. There's a lot of national med services and big providers that just put out data and information, and they never get feedback. So they never know who uses it, how, when, why. So therefore, a lot of the cases at the moment is that people see the kind of understanding why the services are important and for whom is quite good, because it helps to justify ongoing investment in those services or to fund new services if needed. So this is our project, South Asia, funded by the British government and in collaboration with the World Bank and in collaboration with the Met Office, focusing on Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And it's pretty much to understand what's already out there, and and within that I lead work package 4 on value, which we just have case studies understanding the socioeconomic benefits of the weather and climate services there in the region. So in this particular one, I'm just focusing on one of the case studies, and this is work we're doing in the Pakistan Met Department, where they have an array of products, an array of climate services, weather and climate services they put out every month, every week, every day, and particularly target to as kind of for the farming community, a lot of agromed advisories, but they do not understand who uses it, when, how, so they can't justify why it is important, the work they do, basically. So we try to understand a number of things, not only who's using it and who's not using it and why, and this is focusing on the farming community, so it's very much ground level in Pakistan. Farmers' perceptions, so as you can see, Victor, we do look at farmers' perceptions, we look at what they think how they perceive the information provided by the PMD, and so on and so forth. And for those that use the services, how they see the benefits of it and all of that. And again, we're trying to have, and this is something important in terms of methods, is how representative your sample needs to be. In this case, Pakistan is a national provider, and Pakistan is quite big in terms of population. As you know, a lot of it is very vulnerable to a number of extreme events. And obviously we had to try and reach out to, there was a whole process of determining how many people wanted to talk to, where we wanted to talk to, who was going to deploy this on the ground. So there was a number of different considerations that I have to have, and we're working with partners in the region as well. So in the end, we ended up doing a household survey, which is it's currently being done. So it was deployed this week. So they're going house by house, 600 households, asking, do you use, do you not use, what do you use, when you use, why you use, where do you get information, and so on and so forth. And then following from this, we're going to organize some focus groups to really help us distill how exactly do they use it. So all of the questions we can't ask in depth in the survey, we're going to use the focus groups to do that. And that's it, I think. So some references there, and apologies, I tend to talk a lot apparently. So apologies for that. But if there are any questions, and the presentation will be, it is available already in the Google Drive, sorry. So any questions or comments? Can we all go home then?
Just have a short, quick question comment, Marta, because I found the concept that Antonio presented earlier, the minimum viable product, very interesting, and I was wondering whether it has ever made into the climate service domain to any extent, because it's very interesting, the analogy that it was making with the car without wheels, and then on the other side, the skateboard, the bicycle, something that moves, but it may lack the seat or other important things that are in the car, but it still moves. Still moves. It was very powerful concept to me.
I quite like that concept as well in this presentation because I can see the parallel there. I think in terms of my own experience, because I mainly work in climate service, but from a research point of view, so from the more kind of academic engagement, right? It's a very particular context. So it's not so much about, because I see that kind of concept perhaps more in a commercial setting, something that can actually, with the economic value attached to it, where the research is slightly a different beast at points. And I think there are important differences there. But I was really interested in that because I think that's something that is emerging now within the climate service landscape more and more, and the kind of the discussions we're having, even in terms of research, which is this idea of how to upscale climate services, for example. So normally, and I think there's a bit of a parallel there, which is you develop a climate service, which is normally developed around the specific needs of a specific group, right? And then how do you upscale that? And I think there's something there with what Antonio said that could be, perhaps there's something there that we need to explore a bit more. What would be the basic common denominator that could be used across a range of different users?
Exactly.
When perhaps the ideal product is just for a specific group of users for which that service was developed, but perhaps there's a bit of a extrapolation that can be done and have that minimum, what was the thing? Minimum value.
Viable product.
Yes.
Something that is kind of known, for example, in the software development domain, you know about that. And when people develop apps or web apps or things like that, they know about that very well. But to me, as the climate service community kind of matures and the things are better understood, and it's something that must be, as you were saying, probably we need to come up with a skateboard definition for climate services.
No, I think that's a really I think for me is that big question about where, how much do we need to extrapolate something that is developed for a very specific group and make it something that it's less defined, but perhaps it caters for a wider group of people. So I think there's something there that needs to be explored, and I think that's something that it's definitely in my mind. For me, scalability of whatever we develop in the context of a particular case study is really important, because otherwise we won't be able to expand whatever products, whatever services we develop that can be used by a wider range of people, right? That will always be to that specific group. So how do we make that, how do we bridge that? And I think there's something there with what Antonio said. But actually,
Thanks,
how do you
Marta.
say it again? Minimum what? How do you call it
minimum
again?
Minimum viable product. I'm going to write it because my English is so bad.
No, it's not you. It's me. I'm not feeling great today, so I keep forgetting things. But I think there's something there.
There it is.
Definitely. Thank you.
MVP. Grazie,
MVP.
Marta. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. Any other questions or comments?
Hi, Marta. It's Miriam. I have a question on the last steps after implementation of climate services. For example, we have examples of services implemented, but from what I understand from the literature is that these are quite all new services, and so there may be information on how to develop the product and to what extent this could be useful for end users. But I was wondering if you have some examples also after implementation, for example, during monitoring, or if there are other methodologies to assess the effectiveness or the outcomes of the actual delivery of the service in any example. I don't know.
Yeah, there is quite. That's another area that is kind of fast coming and increasing in climate services is the evaluation of its use right on the ground, and there's a lot to be said, and actually that's an area I work with. So in the ARC program, the ARC project I was talking about, I also do that. I do that kind of understanding of the added value to them and how to measure that, right? Because it's quite tricky. There's a range of different methods. There's quite a bit of literature on that. WMO have made couple of reports. I've wrote a couple of papers on that, and I've also, as part of ARC, we developed a report which distills some of these methods as proposed by WMO, because they go also from very quantitative econometrics models down to the very participatory approaches. So it depends what you're looking at. I think I might have included here. I'm not sure if I have. Let me just put this. Sorry, my computer just. I think I've included. Yeah. So anyway, I can send you that. But there's not a lot we understand of how exactly. Sometimes we don't know how they're being used, and sometimes we know how they're being used, but we don't understand how they are generating benefits, whatever they are, because there can be a range of different benefits as well. It can be from socio-economic, environmental, and so on and so forth. There is also a certain distinction that is important between use and between value, right? One thing is using it. You can use something, so you need to use the service to generate the value, but you can use it and not generate value as well. So they are intrinsically linked, but there's also different ways of looking at it. But this to say, yes, there's quite a bit of, well, not quite a bit, but they tend to be quite either focusing on the methods of how to do it, or there's also some papers that start looking into how to, kind of how certain services are bringing added value and benefits to them. So, I mean, I'm happy to pass on more information on that if you want. Let me know what exactly you want to know. But I think in my presentation today, my paper from 2018B, which is assessing the value of seasonal forecasts for decision making, that provides quite a good understanding of how to assess the benefits of seasonal forecasts in this case. But a lot of the methods are similar to climate services, and what kind of considerations you need to take when you're doing this kind of assessments. But again, a lot of, particularly the participatory methods, are very similar to the methods I was just talking about. It's more when you start quantifying in terms of kind of econometrics or agency-based models and things like that, and it becomes a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also interesting, for example, to see the durability of the service, to like the timing of use of the service in the short or long term. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, I'm involved in another project in Africa, and we're doing exactly that. We're doing an assessment of what are the climate services that have been deployed over the last few years, the type of climate services, who are the countries, who's using it, all of that. So try to unpack a bit what exactly are these climate services, how long they've been around, who provides them. So really try and unpack some of the big questions around climate services. Because I think there's a lot going on. And also it doesn't help the fact that the definition of climate services is not straightforward. So it includes a lot of different things. So it really depends on how people perceive that as well. What do they mean by climate services? But there's a lot of efforts going on by different levels of agency, from the international down to the local. So really trying to understand what's going on in a particular place at a particular time is quite complex. But it is interesting, and I think it is important because that's the only way of learning about it, right? What's working, what's not working, how we can improve things moving forward.
Yeah. Who maintains, for example, the service within times. Yeah.
Precisely. And I think, and that comes to my point again, which, the difference between developing some of these efforts within a research project, which is 3, 4, 5 years duration tops, and then it ends. And a lot of the times these services they just disappear. So all of the efforts of co-producing over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they just, most of the time, sometimes they are kind of recycled, assimilated into other funding streams, but more often than not, unfortunately, they just vanish. So, also what is the impact of that to the people you engage with in the development of the service, right? When there's no long-term sustainability for what you're producing as well. So that's kind of, you know, the other end of a service that is provided by a national med service, for example, where there tends to be more depends on the national med service, but you know, the kind of the access to budget, and they have their you know, their scope of agencies to actually to provide these kind of services to communities, to agencies, to organizations. So those two contexts are very different, and they mean very different things as well. And I think that's where the evaluation of climate services really has a really important point to make, which is to demonstrate the impact on the ground, the benefits, whatever they are, which can be at various levels as well, to justify that continuous investment as well. And a lot of national med services are doing that because of that, exactly that, to justify continued investment for the services they provide.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Thanks, Marta.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. Sorry. It's obvious, you know, I'm really interested in this area of evaluation and also co-production, but evaluation is really an area I'm really, really interested in and working on at the moment. So yeah, I'm happy to have more conversation. You guys
that would be great. Thanks. Thanks again.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments? If not, I think we can close, I suppose. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks so much. I hope I didn't run too long. I hope you find it useful. As I said, I'll be around. So any questions about methods, how to approach things, and co-production, evaluation, I'll be around for the rest of the Living Lab. So I'm happy to have conversations, chats about that if useful. If not, anyway, we can talk next Thursday. That's the next plenary session, so we'll be there. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks,
I'll
Marta.
see you on Thursday. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.